Hey y'all, welcome to Tears and Joy in Your 20s. I'm your host, Julia Light, and I am so glad you're here. Navigating your 20s comes with a lot of highs and lows, a lot of freedom, and a lot of uncertainty. That's why I created a space for conversation about all of it. On this podcast, you'll hear interviews of creatives, entrepreneurs, people doing big things in their 20s telling their story, tears and joy and all. I hope this helps you know you're not alone. There's so much to look forward to, and you can savor this season right in the messy middle. Okay, guys, today's episode is an interview with my friend Christian Fussell. Christian is hilarious. He's so fun. He's a real estate agent in Fort Worth, Texas, which is where I lived before I moved to New York. And if you live in Fort Worth, everyone knows him. If you live in New York, you probably don't know him. But he's amazing. He's so fun. And we talk about how do you become a successful business person in your 20s, but also what are some major setbacks you've had in your 20s? What are things that us as a culture at large are causing us to struggle in our 20s? It's just a really helpful and fun conversation. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear Christian's story and all the different things we chat about along the way. Okay, guys, I'm so excited to welcome to the podcast today, Christian Fussell. What's up, Christian?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited for what you're doing, excited to talk to you about this stuff. And we were talking obviously off the air, but even just what this whole podcast is about, I'm really into just these kind of thoughts of just your 20s, navigating that, all the ups and downs and mountains and valleys. So anyways, we'll get into that in the next couple minutes.
Okay. I know. Seriously. We all have things to say on that. And I know you do. So I'm so excited. Okay, guys. So Christian is a real estate agent. Do you prefer realtor or real estate agent?
It was so funny. I was telling someone yesterday, I was like, there's like three ways that you can say it. It can be like realtor, realtor, which I feel like people from the Midwest say realtor.
Realtor. Yeah.
And then you can just say real estate agent.
Yeah.
I don't prefer any of them. I've started to say realtor. I don't know why.
Realtor.
My girlfriend says it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know. I feel like I said that and when I went to real estate school, because I like almost became a realtor.
I remember you told
New
me.
York, I know. But I remember they were like, there is no realtor. Like they were like, realtor.
That is so funny. Yeah, I
So
never got that speech.
depends on where you go, I guess. But yeah, so I know Christian from Fort Worth, which is where I lived before New York, and Christian is just kind of one of those guys that everyone knows in Fort Worth. He's kind of like a little local celebrity, and he's just a great person, very friendly and kind, and is doing great in real estate and helping a bunch of people buy the houses, which is amazing. And it's really cool because he started that. You were what, like 23 when you started in real estate?
I was 20, so I just wrapped up my fourth full year and I just turned 29. So I was 28, 27, 26. Yeah, I was started to get my license at 23.
Okay,
It took me a little bit. And then officially my first full month, like full time, in real estate was January of 2020. So
Okay.
obviously kind of
Right before.
an interesting year that two months later the pandemic hit. And so been a part of it through just very interesting times.
Yeah,
But
for
yeah, I was
sure.
23, 24.
Yeah. Okay. So super young. And that's like another thing where there's a bunch of people who are probably like, "Oh, you're so young." But then
Yeah.
somehow you've convinced all these people to
Yeah,
like
I know.
help the houses. So I feel like you have a lot to say.
Well, I feel like even on that thought, like and I think a lot of people battle this in their 20s is, I have a friend who's a consultant and he got that job right out of college. And I'm like, how can you consult anybody on anything at 22 or 23 years
Yeah.
old? It's the same thing for real estate. I'm like, man, I got into it and was just so insecure about that of just my age.
Mm-hmm.
Predominantly, if you look at like just the real estate industry in general, and I feel like maybe somewhere like New York has a little bit more of that younger hip feel to it. But if you
Yeah.
look at like Texas and Fort Worth, where I'm located, um, I mean, I work in an office where I'm like the, you know, second or third youngest person.
Yeah.
Predominantly across the whole industry, it's agents who have been doing the business for 10, 20, 30 years, even longer. And so getting into it definitely had the like, dang, I'm kind of an outcast here. And the
Yeah.
most interesting part too is I'm like, I've never bought a home,
Yes.
and I'm helping these people buy houses. And so for the first like, and if you're an independent contractor, and you're 1099, it's like you have to wait 2 years. So it's like for 2 full years, I was helping people buy homes, and I had never personally bought a home. And so there's this like little bit of fraud,
You
not
have to you
fraud,
have to
but
wait 2 years before you can buy a house.
yeah, because if you're applying for a loan, they have to have 2 years proof of income if
Oh,
you're an independent contractor. So if unless you're paid by like an agency or a formal company, you can just do the pay stubs because it's
okay.
consistent. So they want the 2 years because they need to see some sort of consistency over the 2 year period to say, hey, we'll approve you for X amount loan at this price point,
Got
etc.
it. Okay, so you're
So
like,
yeah.
I'm selling people houses. I can't buy my own house yet, but someday I will. Okay. Why
Yes.
don't you just tell us, Christian? We've like sort of jumped in, but can you just tell us like the story of your 20s and how you got into real estate and what you're doing now?
Totally. So born and raised in Texas, I had a couple stints outside of Texas. In Ohio, I interned at a church, and then in Nairobi, was there for a summer. So outside of that, born and
Nairobi's
raised in
in
Texas,
Kenya.
Nairobi, Kenya. Yes, yes,
Cool,
yes. So I was
cool.
there for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
I was doing an internship with a nonprofit called One Hope. Um, it was one of the most, I mean, even that on this theme of just in your 20s, I think it is, if you're studying abroad at a university, going overseas, if you're in the medical world, just such a big pro just to see, even if it's for, I mean, honestly, even if it's for like a week or 10 days
Yeah.
or like a month, I just think it's such a big pro to kind of immerse yourself in a different culture. I was there obviously for a very long, extended amount of time. But that would be something I would tell absolutely anybody,
Mhm.
to travel in some way where it's like you're living the day to day there. It's
You're
not
so
super
good.
close. Um, so after all that, anyways, born and raised in Texas, and so went to a very small private Christian school for college. My whole life dream was to be a youth pastor, or an evangelist, just preaching and speaking the Bible and God's word. And I had no other. There was like no plan B, no backup plan. So I went to this college. They had a leadership school in the university that was connected to the church that I was attending. I was attending that church, and then as well interning. So went there 2013 all the way through 2017, and I kind of started out as like intern, door holder, chair stacker, that whole thing. And then they would give me some opportunity to MC on the mic, or, finally I ended up coming on part-time staff. And then in 2017, which was my senior year of college, in February, it was the best birthday present ever. The youth pastor asked me to come on staff. And I remember writing down whenever I was probably a junior in high school, like in a notebook that I still have, like just two of the biggest dreams I ever had in the world at that point. And you're so young, so you have no idea what like dreams really even
Yeah.
look like, were to come on staff to the church that I was attending, and ended up coming on staff on. And then two was to like preach a sermon to the youth group.
Oh,
Um, and this is like Texas, so it's like there's mega churches everywhere. So we had like
yeah.
this would have been considered a mega church. We probably had 4 or 5 thousand people on a Sunday, and then
Yeah.
like 500-600 students on a Wednesday night.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was on the larger end with all the high schools around. So ended up coming on staff in February, and then preached my first sermon in March. And I
Oh,
remember, so I had been on staff for a month. I remember preaching that sermon, and it's this whole kind of hype celebrity culture church too. So, I'm
mhm.
going outside taking pictures with people. I end up
Yeah.
going to my office, and I remember so vividly sitting down and just being like, shoot, what next?
Mhm.
Like, I kind of checked off these two things in my mind that I had only amounted to like the two things that I could do and that I should do. It was like preach this sermon and be on staff at this church. And so I think from there, it started to be a little bit of like an internal spiral in my
Mm,
head of like, gosh, what do I do? I don't want to be 40 or 50 and be a youth pastor. I don't know if I want to be a pastor forever. I
mm,
kind of started to have these thoughts in my head that spiraled into, 6 months later, I ended up being let go from the church. And so that was this complete 180 in my life. Again, I
mm.
had no plan B, no backup plan. It was like youth pastor and that's it. And I really enjoyed this job, like getting to connect with others, making people feel special and important are two things that I just hold to the highest value.
Mm,
So once I got let go, it was this like I just remember walking out after I had kind of my exit interview,
yeah.
walking out and being like, dude, I have no idea what to do with my life.
And you're like 20 at
And
that point,
at
23.
that point, I was 22. At that
Yeah.
point, I was 22. And so I, I don't even know. I think just like I wrote down these like 8 things on in my notes app on my phone of what I could do. 7 of them were running away essentially to like another state to intern with the church, another country. I threw out Nairobi, which I was like, why the hell did I think of that? But
Mhm.
like throughout all these different things that were just running away
Yeah.
from
You're just like, what do we
where I
do?
was at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a healthy element to change. And I think moving can bring some positive impact on people's lives. I think if anyone were to be in the situation of wanting to move or start a new career, I think something that I didn't assess that I at that point, and I'm glad I assessed later, is like moving doesn't change any of the problems that are happening inside of your mind and inside of yourself. Um, you just pretty much pick up the same person and put them in a different state or a
Yeah.
different country. And you still have these thoughts. You just can't escape them.
Yeah.
So after a little bit, I came to that. The one thing that I put on, and this kind of goes into how I got into real estate,
Okay.
is which was the initial question. Sorry for all the last part.
You're great.
So there was one thing on that list that was not running away, and it was working at a coffee shop in they're all over DFW, but this one was in Waxahachie. It's called White Rhino. It's a craft coffee shop. I knew the owner of White Rhino, and he's this like business mogul. His name's Chris Parvin, and I'm willing to say his name because he has impacted my life so positively.
Mhm.
So Chris owned this coffee shop. He was also a real estate investor. He was also had ownership in a real estate company.
Yeah.
He property manager, a lawyer. Like this guy, was a boss.
Yeah.
And I worked at the coffee shop part time before I got on staff at the church. And so I remember walking into the coffee
Oh,
shop
okay.
right after I wrote down that list of 8 things. And I go to the coffee shop with literally just a journal to just journal my thoughts because that was the only thing that I was like, okay, I can do this and feel like this is getting me somewhere.
Hmm.
So I walk into the coffee shop, kind of walk past the wall, and he's right there with his manager. He's right there. And at this point, this has been probably a week or 2 weeks after I had gotten let go. And of course, word had traveled. It's a small town. And so I go stand in line, and he walks up behind me. He's like, hey, man, everyone calls me Fussell. It's just a catchy last name, Fussell or Fussy. Um, and so he's like, Fussell. He's like, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm doing okay. And I'm so bummed. I'm like, I'm doing okay. And then he says, just straight up, goes, do you need a job? And I literally look at him and I start crying. And
Oh,
I'm just like, you have no idea. He's like, do you need a job? And I was like, yes. And
yes.
so he walks me behind the counter of this coffee shop and talks to the manager. And he's like, hey, Christian's hired, have him onboarded, tomorrow or next week.
Wow.
So I like don't even ask for this job that I am now a part of, or didn't even apply, send in a resume. I just got it, and I was like, dude, this is like the universe, God, whatever, is working in my favor.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I end up working for that coffee shop for a bit, and I get more time around him. He ends up just saying, hey, I'd love to take you under my wing and just show you the ropes of business because I said I wanted to do business. And so now I
Yeah.
have this like mentor older, I don't even know if I say older brother or father, whatever.
Yeah.
I have him in my life and he's really advocating for me. And so we ended up having lunch one day and pretty much I had just went to him and said, "Hey, what do you think I should do?" You could have told me to be a firefighter and I would be a firefighter right now. Like I
Yeah.
would have just done literally whatever he said because I had no idea what I
Yeah.
wanted to do.
Right.
I thought I wanted to get into like property management. He was like, "You can do that." He's like, "You're not gonna like it." And he just goes, "I think that you should do real estate." He's like, it's a people focused and oriented business. Um, you make good money doing it, and I think that you really enjoy it. And so I wrote that down on a notepad that I still have today. Do real estate or apply for your real estate exam.
Yeah.
So I went through that was in 2019. I went through the courses. It took me 6 months to do them. I failed the exam twice. The third time, I was like, I'm driving 45 minutes to Waco, Texas. And if I don't do this, then I'm going to have a long, very depressing drive home.
Oh,
Luckily, I passed it.
I deserve
And
it.
that was in like December of 2019. So then I found a company that I worked at starting in January
Okay. And is
of
that when you moved
2020.
to Fort Worth?
So I had been kind of coming to Fort Worth. I was coming to this church and then I started to make friends up here. And then I was interning with the net, the nonprofit.
Oh, oh.
Um, I was doing helping kind of run this sports after school sports
Yeah.
program one day a
Mhm.
week at the Ladera for refugee children.
Cool.
And so I had been coming up and I was like, really like this city. It's this hidden gem in Texas.
It is.
Um, I'm
Yeah.
it is, and I'm like, I love this place. I never really came here before, and then I started to get connected with people, find friends and community, and really started to love it. So that I ended up moving here in October of 2020 because I was living in
Okay.
Midlothian with my
So you were kind
dad,
of like a back and forth for a little bit.
back and forth. I was like every day I was driving to Fort Worth or Dallas, and then in October I made the move to Fort
Okay.
Worth, and then I've been here since. So almost 4 years, 3.5 years.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. And it's crazy because like you know everyone in Fort Worth. So it's like crazy to think
Thank you
that
for that.
you haven't been there your whole life. Yeah.
It is definitely like, and I feel like you're so good at this too, Julia. It's like just connecting with others and learning more about other people is just a fun thing to do. And I think it
It
just
is.
opens up the possibilities on the end of like, you never know who you're gonna meet, who's gonna do this cool thing, like what you're doing. I mean, I think we met just through mutual friends, and
Yeah.
it's like you're now doing this podcast, and I think it's gonna take off and just be so killer and is needed in this space. And it's like I get to just be a small little guest on this podcast, and I'm just some real estate agent from Fort Worth, you know. But it's
Exactly.
like, but we have a friendship.
Yes, we do. And that's what's so cool. And even like my best friend Madeline, I'm not sure if you know her. She went to
Yeah,
TCU, but
yeah,
she was episode one of the podcast and she's a jazz musician. And she was talking about how a lot of her job is just like, or her job, like her networking and like getting her foot in the door is a lot of just like meeting people and saying, "Hey, I'm a musician too. Could we play a set together? Or could you show me how you did that? Or can I ask you a question? Can we get coffee?" Or at a restaurant meeting the management and saying like, "Hey, do you have live music here? Because I sing and I could sing here." Like, and just a
yeah.
lot of that. It's just like it's relational. It's like you could say networking, but it's really just like it's not networking in like a
That has
selfish.
like a scammy. Yeah, that has like a
Yeah,
networking has
not
like
in
a
a
scammy
scammy way.
connotation.
It's just
Yeah,
genuinely, and that's probably so similar for you and your work because you're like, no, I'm genuinely love to meet people and know everyone. And when you meet people, that's more people that you can help find a house. And that's
there.
not
Yes,
sketchy. That's like hopeful, you know?
there is this definitely there's a middle ground in what I do in the sense of like I love just to connect with others and build friendships and relationships. And then there's this other side of like, okay, well, if they bought a house, I'd love to help them.
Right.
There's this like internal, I don't want to say ulterior motive, but there's these two kind of,
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say battles. There's just two thoughts going on in my head
Yeah.
at the same time.
How do you like
And
balance that?
I was about to, I was about to talk about that. I think it's tough. And for me, one thing I do to balance that kind of stuff is I hardly ever initially bring up what I do.
Mm.
Um, Real estate definitely is a thing where when you bring it up, people talk about it. How's the market? Rates are high. How is this? All that. Like it's just a point of interest that a lot of people, will just talk about.
Yeah.
And I just make it a point to never bring it up first. Like I'll
Okay.
never go, but hey, I'm Christian. Hey, I do real estate in Fort Worth. You know, it's like, hey, I get to know this person, where they're from, what they do. And of
Yeah.
course, the question just ends up coming up. So I think that's been the best thing for me on the practical side of battling that. And then on the internal side, when you view people as an asset for your life and just a dollar sign essentially in
Yeah.
any industry, and I think even in like the entertainment industry, this could be hard
Oh yeah.
because you're consistently wanting to meet the person who's going to introduce you to the thing. And it's the same for me. I'm wanting to meet the person who will introduce me to this or that, or how I can get in this circle. And it's just it can be a rat race and feel like a rat race at
Yeah.
sometimes. um and so there's definitely that also kind of motive or thought going on in my head. So
Yeah, you
it's
gotta
it's
fight
hard.
your heart all the time, probably.
Completely. Yeah, it's all
Yeah.
internal. It's all
And just
internal.
remembering, I'm sure for you, just remembering, and yeah, same with entertainment, same with anything. It's like this person's value is like in them being a person.
Totally.
Like what they can do for me. I feel like as people, we're just so prone to like in any way think of like, well, what can I get from someone? And then it's like, wait. That's not what's important about them?
Right. And you can feel when someone's like that.
Yeah.
You really can feel when someone's like that. And I think there's way too many. I mean, real estate agents have probably, they're like, there's used car salesmen and then there's real estate agents. And it's like
Yeah.
we've got the worst connotation,
Yeah, honestly.
which is a great opportunity to kind of defy the myth. But yeah, it definitely can be a very, very difficult task.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about some of the challenges you've had to overcome in your 20s. You mentioned getting let go from your first job out of college. I'm sure that there was a lot of, I mean, I know you mentioned going to the coffee shop and like, oh, what am I going to do? But I can imagine and sort of relate from some of my own just experiences in life. Like there's
Yeah.
shame, there's confusion, there's like, tell us about some of that. Just it's like because people might see your story and be like, oh wow, he's like killing it in real estate. He's only 29. He's doing what
Yeah.
some people aspired to do at 45, whatever. But you're like, oh, but actually, do you know what happened before this? So tell us
Yeah. pull
anything.
back the pull back the curtains.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody has a story. And I think it's important to
Yeah.
like, definitely when you're looking, I fall into the comparison trap every day, all day. And so whenever you're looking at somebody and comparing your life to theirs, if it's as a human being or a professional in work, whatever status, followers on Instagram and TikTok, you
Yeah.
know, there's so much context to everyone's life that got them to where they're at. And so I
Yeah.
think it's important to try to understand that when you're in the comparison thing. But to your question, yeah, I can even like, I'm a very much so like an emotional kind of guy and value that. And so I can kind of put myself back and to feel some of those feelings whenever I did get let go, because there was shame, there was anxiety, there was fear, there was confusion, there was so much. Um, and it was a situation where I'm like, I don't necessarily blame the church for letting me go at all. Of how they handled it, I think was a poor way of doing that. And I think if it is a you know church organization or a business, it like any type of getting let go can be done in a very poor way or a very positive way. I think I
It's
was
very
kind of,
true.
yeah, and I think I was on the poor way that it was handled in some degree. And so feeling all those things, you just feel like life knocks you down. And I think all of life knocks you down. And obviously people don't go through just one, two, or three you know I don't want to say trials, but really difficult seasons of life.
Like setbacks. Yeah.
Yeah, setbacks. And but there's always like three to four really big ones. And this was a really, one of those for me, where I just remember feeling so lost. And I had this picture of what my life would be at 25, and I was 23 at this point.
Mhm.
I had this picture of what my life would be at 25. And when that kind of rug just gets taken from under you, your identity in some ways is taken from you. And you hear so much now with a lot of college students going into like the medical field or engineering or law, like being a lawyer. their parents were lawyers, their parents were engineers, their parents were all of this. And I think it's one of those things where I definitely think it's one of those things that you you really you really bend to the pressure of things, and you just find out, hey, I'm doing this just because my parents want me to, or just because all my friends are doing this. I'm going to this university because this is what all my friends are doing, or moving to this new city after college because this is what everyone else is doing. And I think I felt a lot of that. I have never had like a strong parental influence in my life, or like I never really had a strong relationship with my mom or dad. So I didn't really have much of that guidance. So whenever I started going to church, I
Mhm.
found that guidance from, from the youth pastor and the associate pastor and the senior pastor.
Yeah.
I found that from them. So really whatever they were saying I should do, I would just do because I felt this acceptance from them.
Yeah.
Um, and so then compound a breaking of that, like people who I really just love, I felt alone even whenever I got let go. And so um there's a lot of those negative feelings, and I'm just thinking of what got me out of that.
Yeah.
And obviously time is the most annoying thing in life, and it's the best thing in life. Time of just getting back up again and continuing to walk. That
Yeah.
was a big thing. And I really would say just friendships.
Mm.
Like the fact that if you can have someone, if it's you got let go from a job, or you're feeling anxious about a career path, or whatever, it's things that you feel in your early 20s. Um, if you can just have friends that you can vocate that with, or family if you trust them, I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing. And so I had a lot of really good friends, and I have still a lot of really good friends in my life that I can be open with and honest with and raw with. And so I think to push someone out of like an anxious season of life, um, I think communities really the
Yeah.
biggest thing. And then having some, like, whatever faith looks like to you. Um, for me at that point, it was just like, oh, I'm so sure of this thing of faith and Jesus and all
And
this.
after you got let go, you were
Yeah,
still no, but
kind of.
I'm sure
It was
that was
really,
a
it was,
challenge.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
like, the deconstruction word is obviously thrown around a lot, but like that's really what I was in.
Mm.
And whenever you look at humans as like a figure of God, you kind of get in a tough spot of you're going to get let down, and then you you can't really
Yeah,
you can't
thinking
really
they're
expect
perfect,
perfection.
perfect, and they know everything, and then they, yeah,
Completely, completely. So that's kind of where I was at, and still in this, like, man, I believe this stuff, but like I have troubles with just like at the organizational side of religion,
yeah,
and what it looks like to me from getting burnt. And so um yeah, I'd say just community and being vulnerable with community were the biggest pros of my life.
yeah.
Were the
That's really
biggest pros of my
good.
life.
And those, yeah, those friends that you can talk about the hard existential faith questions with, and the career, because that's just really like both of those things are so big, and
They're
like
huge.
we all are thinking about that at this time in our
Completely.
lives. We're like, okay, so where am I going? What am I doing? What's it all for? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so nice to have a sounding board. And because your friends need that too,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
it's like, you kind of want someone who has at least a good head on their shoulders, and whatever that means to each individual. But like
Yeah.
you want someone who has a pretty good head on their shoulders to bounce those things off of. Because I think if you have some pretty negative, cynical influences in your life, you can get into a rough path of just
Very true.
looking through a very negative lens in life. And honestly, thank God that I've had some pretty awesome people in my life.
Positive people. That's good. Okay. Do you feel like you talked about like, okay, everyone's gonna have a setback, everyone's gonna have a job that doesn't work out, whatever. And I even remember like I ran into this girl who I looked up to in college at Target when I was still living in Fort Worth last year. And I was just kind of sharing about what post grad had looked like for me. And she was like, oh yeah, like she's probably 3 years older than me. She's like, oh, all my friends, like we didn't like our first job out of college. Or like all of us, like our first job out of college just like didn't work out. Or it wasn't what we thought it would be. And I was like, really? Like, me too. Like, I didn't know.
Like,
It, like, yeah. And you just You just don't know that when you're in college. I wish they would like, that's part of the reason why I want to start this podcast too, just to tell people like it's okay.
Yeah.
Your first job
Yeah.
doesn't go the way you thought or whatever. But okay, all that to say, as far as getting at with this is, do you are you grateful now looking back that you had that major setback at 22, 23, rather than like at 26 or like your first, I don't know if you're your first in life, but your first like adult setback. Like, are you grateful or like how has that shaped you?
Yeah. I think yes, blanket statement, yes. And I think context to that is like, when you're kind of in a pit, you're not thankful you're in it. But when you're out of it, and you can see it for what it was, and it was just like, hey, this is just time that I was set back or in this maybe hard time in life. You look back at it and you're like, man, I had to climb out of that pit, and I'm so much stronger for that. And so for me, that's kind of where I'm at now. I don't think that first year I was like that. I think I had a lot of bitterness. I had a lot of hate, honestly, a lot of frustration, shame. I had a lot of it. Every negative emotion you can think of, I had a lot of it.
Yeah.
Um, and so now though, I'm like in that situation of getting like, oh gosh, I was 2018, however many years ago that was, 4, 5, almost 6 years, 5 years. Now I'm like, man, I'm so great. Like that was, in all honesty, and there's no shade towards like the church or anything like that. That was the best thing that never happened to me is
Mm,
excelling in that career. Best thing
oh,
that never happened to me. And I'm so grateful for that because what would have happened there? I believe, I believe it was God who had that situation or had kind of the setback and made that happen
yeah.
to get me to the spot of where I'm at now, which I feel like it's just a way healthier whole individual. Um, I am so grateful that happened. Because I would have excelled in that career, and I think I would have just been an empty person and an unhealthy person in every single way. And whenever you do that and you climb this ladder and you fall, the fall is a lot harder. It's a lot longer.
Yeah.
And
There's not
that's
like the
just
hard cuts along the
and
way.
and I think that is some encouragement to like 20 something year olds, especially young ones. And you're like before you're like 27, 28, 29. Shoot, from 20 to 29. I would say like
All of us.
legit, literally all of us. I would say these these setbacks are so good for you. Um and these times of just confusion are so good for you. I had someone tell me one time, it was like your 20s is for trying, your 30s are for building, and your 40s are for legacy.
Wow.
And I kind of have held close to that of like in your 20s, you really can try as much as possible because you haven't climbed a high enough ladder yet to where
Right.
when you fall, there's a lot of repercussions. When you think
Wow.
about that, when you fall in
Yeah.
your 40, whatever it looks like, if it's a pastor's moral failure or a businessman with
Yeah.
fraud or stealing money, whatever, like the fall's just so you have family, you have kids, you have people who rely on you, employees, friends. Like the fall is just hurts. The collateral is so much more. You hurt so many more people. So in
Yeah.
your 20s, when you fall, like you can get back up again and you can try the next ladder. And the best thing about life is there's so many ladders out there that you can try to climb up. And if you don't like it, jump over to the next one and then
No,
jump over to the next one. And I think that there was shame in that of not
yeah.
excelling in one job for your whole life. I think there was
Mhm.
shame
For
over
sure.
like, I really in the last like 10 or so years, I feel like it's been changed to, hey, figure out like you're important, you matter. It's not what your parents say, it's not what your friends
Yeah.
say, it's not what your boss says, you matter.
Yeah.
And
You're uniquely gifted for this.
yeah,
Yeah.
and find out what you like to do and what gives you life.
Yeah.
Obviously, no job's going to be perfect, and nothing like, we can't all be golf. This is maybe me projecting. We can't all be golf influencers and just make millions of dollars doing YouTube videos for golf.
I've
Like
never in my
we
life heard of
can't.
a dolphin foot.
You not everyone can do that,
Yeah,
and
no,
so
not everyone can, especially if you don't even know what that is. So,
yeah, if you don't know what that is, you can't get into the
but yeah,
space. And if you're like me, you can't golf, you can't be in it for sure.
that's true.
Um, yeah, it's like, of course, everyone's gonna like. not enjoy their job in totality, but finding something that gives you life, I think is very, very important. Very, very
Mm,
important.
yes, and it's okay if it's not the thing you picked at 22.
It's completely fine. And I think
It's
it's
actually
also,
great.
yeah, I think it's also great if you're in your 30s, and you want to do a career change or you want to do a job change. Like, I also think that that is completely fine. Because when you look at the grand scheme of just like culture says, really honestly, once you're 25, you're getting old. And then once you're 30 and I'm about to reach it, you're like, oh, this feels really old. I was talking to a 70-year-old guy the other day, and he referenced like a 42-year-old, and he was like, yeah, that young guy's got a lot going for him. And when you look in the grand scheme, 40 years old is not even like, it's not even, you're obviously older than 20, but you're not anciently old, you know?
No, not at all.
And
Yeah.
so there's this stigma that really like 25 is the new midlife crisis. Um, 30 is just the most detrimental day of in most people's years when they turn that. And I think that that stigma just has to go. I think it has to
Yeah.
go.
It's gotta go. It's gotta go. I know.
It's
It's
gotta
so
go
true. Like, especially with technology and things like, aren't we aging slower? Like, aren't our bodies like, don't we know
completely.
how to take care of them better? So why would we fear? Yeah. That is,
I'm right
yeah,
there with you.
it's so interesting thinking about how culture views like age and all of that. Okay, what do you think you've learned? Like, are there any life lessons you've learned from doing real estate or just kind of having a career that's like you're self-employed technically and you kind of have to like make it happen for yourself? Because a lot of people listening, they may not be in real estate or like buying a house
Sure.
anytime soon, but they might be like starting their own business or freelancing or
Yeah.
doing something like that. So, what are some things that you've learned? I know we talked about just like meeting people and being a connector, but what else?
Sure. I would say, and I caveat this with like I've been doing it for 4 full years, and so it's like
Mhm.
I'm still a newbie in the industry,
Yeah.
but it's been so good to me, and I'm so grateful um, for the job that I have and the work that I do, that it's taught me a lot even in the 4 years, an insurmountable amount, so much. And so I would say, especially for someone who's like, if they're wanting to get into the entertainment business, or if they're wanting to, if they have their own business that they're wanting to start, what I've realized with this is that I don't think that anyone's really necessarily prepped for how much time that takes and how much energy and effort it takes. Um, for the first probably 2 to 3 years of my career, I really felt like I was just a yes man. I would
Mm,
say yes to anything, to anyone asking about anything, anywhere. And that over time has taken a toll on me where I'm like, oh, I feel just empty as a human being. But I think that that's needed. And so if
yeah.
anybody's starting something, um, I think I would say, how much time do you're going to put a lot of time into it. How much time do you think? I would say multiply that times 10, because
Wow.
it really is so much more than that.
Yeah.
Um, because things come up along the way and you're learning, but it's such a fun process. And like, I look at life a lot like a song, and it has a rhythm, or a poem that has you know different chapters, and you turn the page and now it's this. I really look at life a lot that way, and it's great being able to look back now on when I started in 2020, and just how not confident that I felt, and how I felt so insecure. And coming to where I'm at now, I'm like, I feel very confident and I feel very secure, and I can look confidently at someone and say, hey, I really genuinely believe I'm one of the best in this area at this job. Like, I
Yeah.
truly think I'm an expert. And I don't feel insecure saying that, thinking that I'm like boastful and prideful. That's just coming out of confidence. And so yeah, I would say just the poetic nature of life is, if you just keep going, like it's gonna. I shy away from even saying that it's gonna work out, but if you get back up again and you keep moving forward, you're gonna find what you're looking for, and things are gonna work out for you and go your way. I have a
Yeah.
friend who says this phrase. He says, "If you do something, something will happen," and I think that's so freaking
Mm,
true. If you do something, something will happen.
true.
If you're just literally putting forth effort towards anything
Yeah.
and you over a long amount of time, something's going to happen. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, if you're in any type of industry, like you're going to meet the right person and you're not even going to plan it. And that is the most beautiful part about life. You're not even necessarily going to plan it. It's just going to fall in front of you. And I think that happens for the trailblazers, the pioneers, the people who move consistently in the same direction and they get back up again when they're told no. Um,
Yeah.
I think that would those few things would probably be the best bit of advice I would have for anybody who is starting out in a business, in a new career, just
Yeah.
graduated college, trying to figure out what to do. Um, would be those things.
I love that. If you do something, something will happen because it's so true. Like what you think will happen might not happen. Like I even think of times where it's like I'm like I applied for this job, so therefore I must get it. And it's like, okay, maybe I don't get that job, but maybe I learned something about what I do or don't want to do, or I meet somebody, or like there's just always it's like something will happen. You don't know what, but I love that because we can I feel like we can
Yeah.
like, sit at home and just think like, oh, I have to have all my ducks in a row before I can do anything. And it's like, no, just like take your little step, just do
Yeah.
just thing, like even for you, like asking or I guess saying yes when someone was like, hey, do you think about real estate? What like maybe you can do this with me,
Yeah.
versus being like, I have to go do this right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. To get all set up. I think even like, yeah, on that note, I think that that's the good point of like something you definitely feel this little bit of like I have to prep for all these things in life so that I can set it up for it to happen. And of course, I think that there is this like you work hard and good things happen to people who work really hard. But at the same time, there's so much in life that you cannot control. And if you lean into that, it's such a beautiful thing.
Mm,
Stress and anxiety never disappear. They're always going to be there for everybody.
yeah,
Um, but stress, anxiety start to get the load starts to get a little bit lighter whenever you have the openness of like, all right, I'm going to continue to do something, and I know I'm going to meet someone. I know I'm going to get something. I'm going to get somewhere.
yeah,
Something is going to happen.
yeah,
And if you look at like the CEOs of you know two of the bigger companies like Amazon and Apple, it's like these guys just had a dream and they just started doing something. Like the evolution of the MacBook and the iPhone is insane. And
mhm,
that Amazon started out as a bookstore.
yeah,
They just did something. And that what they learned along the way is, oh, this can be a lot bigger than we thought it could. Or, oh,
yeah,
this is going to take me down a different path. I'm not going to sell books anymore. I'm literally going to sell every single product in the whole entire world.
yeah,
That's the kind of the essence of like when you do something, something will happen.
yeah.
Um, and there's so many more other examples of guys and gals who have done that.
For sure. And I think something really interesting. I was like explaining the podcast idea yesterday to this woman who I met who's like a mom, and she was talking about how her daughter, who's like a teenager, doesn't understand when you see things on Instagram that it took that person years to get where they are. And I almost wonder if for us, like Gen Zers, you're probably technically a millennial, but
I'm like right in the
yeah, the cusp.
in the
Yeah.
middle. Yeah.
But for us who are in their 20s today, like we've grown up seeing that of like everyone's perfectly curated life on social media or just things that look so great. And that's another reason why I wanted to start this podcast because most of the people I have on do look really cool on social media. And so to talk about like, okay, actually, what does your life look like? Because no one is actually like that. But
Totally.
I just almost wonder too if that's part of the thing too of us wanting to like have it all figured out or being scared to fail, being scared if our first thing out of college doesn't work out, and that's just I guess something for us to be aware of in our
I
generation is
think
like,
so.
okay, my brain has this added level of like I should be perfect that maybe other people didn't have in the same way. So how do I like embrace the imperfection, embrace the setbacks. And like you were saying before, because I totally agree, having major setbacks early in my career, which is still, I'm early in it, but
Yeah. I would say
a
you're
few
still
years
in
ago,
that early.
very much so. But like having this time where I'm like, very much figuring it out rather than like jumping into a job where I'm like the best on my team and then I'm da, 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 like whatever. Like, and I'm sure same for you, has forced me to realize that I can't control everything, and I'm
Yeah.
so grateful that I've learned that at 22 rather than at 29 when something goes wrong, because it's just true for all of us, no matter how great you are at your job or how much things are figured out or not, you can't control so
Yeah,
much.
you can't control. I think you can, in some essence, you can control the good and bad that comes into your life, but there's this layer of like, all right, I didn't do anything that made this bad thing happen, and I didn't do anything that made this good thing happen. Like that
Yes.
is just, I think that's where, you're like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
I think faith is a good component to like run that through. And if, someone's not
Yeah.
a person of faith or spirituality, it's like that just kind of happens. Like both good things, that's just the way the world runs
Yeah.
is good things happen and bad things happen that we can't control. I completely agree.
No, yeah, it's true. And just accepting that. How do you, with your being a yes man in your early career and or your early real estate career and being able to just like say yes to everything? I think that's so interesting because I've listened to a lot of entrepreneurship podcasts and they're always like, oh yeah, the first, years are insane. Like you're just like, like I listened to one of the founder of Melt and she's like, we're just making ice cream like up so late or something like that. That's
Yeah,
how the picture is like someone the Melt's this great ice cream shop in Fort Worth. But how did you then and how do you now? Because you're still like a hard worker and a go getter. How do you find balance with that in your life? Because I feel like that's also important to not burn out. So how did you do that?
completely. And I got there to the burnout phase. I'll say on a quick note in the reference to like what you said about the melt thing,
Yeah.
the ice cream shop in Fort Worth, if anyone's listening, ever is in Fort Worth, it's a wonderful spot.
It's
But um, I bet for Carrie, the owner,
yeah.
like that time was probably crazy and hectic and so stressful. But if she were to look back at a picture when they started, there's just this level of gratitude that you're like, man,
Mhm.
I pushed through these hard times and this like 2 a.m. nights, 3 a.m. nights, all nighters,
Yeah.
driving left and right, figuring out, making something that's good, making something that's bad. You
Yeah.
you you remember all those, and you're like, man, I pushed through all that, and I'm at a spot now where I have for her X amount of stores. It's like, dang, there's this nostalgia when you look back that I
Yes.
think is a very important aspect in life. If it's like, and if you're in a relationship and you've been dating or married for a long time, go back and look at the pictures or revisit some of the memories or conversations. For me, like I just turned 29. I was telling you off air. I turned 29 and I went back to all pictures and I have like a couple pictures from every single year of my 20s up until now. And I start to feel a lot of the feelings that I felt and just like so much gratitude of, gosh,
Mhm.
I've been through, even though it's not a lot, I've been through a lot in life up to this 29 years. And I'm so grateful I'm standing. I'm so
Yeah.
blessed of like where I'm at in my professional career, in my personal life. Like have so many things I'm grateful for. Um, Now to answer your question of the burnout situation, uh, after I wrapped up my towards wrapping up my third full year, I got to a point of where like kind of yes man turned me into a dead man, and I was for the first time I felt like legit depressed in my life. And I know everyone likes to throw that word around lightly, but I was not in a good spot
Mm.
internally,
Mm.
and wanting to quit, wanting to go back and work a job somewhere else that felt a little bit less stressful to me. Um, the best thing I ever did was I brought on help outside of therapy, which I've been going to, at least every other month for the last like 5 years of my life. I think that's a very, very, you know, great addition to anyone's life is therapy or counseling. For entrepreneurs, they a lot of them say that that first person to hire was one that was the most important, but was also the hardest. And so I
Mm.
brought someone on who helps the organizational and logistical side of my business, kind of the back end stuff of contracts and emails and notifications and prospecting, all, such an umbrella of things
Yeah.
to where I got back to what I enjoyed. And that was connecting with other people, making the home buying or home selling experience for someone just spectacular, making it memorable, and making it fun. And yeah, so I think like bringing on help and setting boundaries are two very practical things that um, I think a lot of people would benefit who are in their 20s, who are an entrepreneur or not. Also, I'm talking as a 29-year-old like I freaking know everything. I know nothing.
No.
And I think that's a beautiful thing about life.
Yeah, no, that's the thing I love about this podcast is sometimes I'm editing. I'm like, did they really just say that? Like, like what would a 45-year-old think? Not you, but
Right.
like that's the point. Like, we're like some audacious 20 somethings over here, like just doing
Oh
our best,
yeah.
share wisdom
Oh
with each
yeah.
other. But like, we all know that we're young and like we're very much figuring it out, you know?
And
Um,
people our parents' age, we're doing the same thing. They just didn't have podcasting and they just didn't have social
it
media
was
to
just
look
at
at.
the
Like,
dinner table. Yeah.
yeah, this has always been a thing.
Okay. Lightning round question because I know we got to wrap up.
Dang.
There's two questions here. You're great at social media. I feel like that's probably part of the why you've done so well. The reason why you've done so well. At least that's how I kind of knew who you were. Like through mutual friends. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
like Christian, of course. Like I'm Christian. And it's like I didn't even know you. When I see you at the coffee shop, I'm like, oh yeah, hey, what's up?
This is
And
true,
then
yeah.
also, and Fort Worth is like it's a smallish town, but it's not that small, but it is
Big
small.
city, small town. Big city,
Um,
small town.
big city, small town. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But even sometimes New York feels like that though. I see people, I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that that's a question. My other question is there like one thing or three things that like my friends who are not in New York City or our listeners who are like living somewhere where you know you can actually buy a house in your 20s, like something that people should know? I don't know, just that you're like, oh, as a real estate agent, I would tell someone this piece of advice, like one thing who's in their 20s. So, okay, two questions, lightning round, go.
I would say anyone where it's like your profession is that social media is a part that can be a really big pro. I think you jump on it for sure. And what I've seen is people just love what they say a lot about my social media is they feel like, and this is like such a compliment. It's I feel like I knew you before we even met. If like we followed each other on Instagram and then like would occasionally respond to stories or whatever, and then I see him in person, it's like, oh, I like know you before I even have known you. I think there's this authenticity side that
Mhm.
is being really seen on social media because it's a lot of just fake crap, and
Yeah.
so I think that's a big thing, and then just consistency of the ebbs and flows, and then on just the real estate advice for a young person if they're in New York, if they're in Fort Worth, if they're in Orange County. I really do think of course, there's myths out there that I could say. I think you have seen 100 of them on social media because all real estate agents just put out the same freaking content. I think the biggest thing I would say is just have a meeting with a local real estate agent in your market who you feel like you would connect with, and if you are having the interest to buy a home, getting just a timeline set up and a game plan set up for you is, I'm telling you, gonna be the best thing.
Wrapping up. This has
Yeah.
been so fun, Christian. You're
I
so
love this.
fun.
You're the best.
Oh, I'm so excited for everyone to hear this episode. Okay, what has given you hope during this time of like a lot of change, navigating the downs in your 20s? What gives you hope and even today as you're looking forward to the future?
I think I would say I think dreaming has given me hope of these things, knowing that I'm 29, I'm still young. I've got a lot of things that I want to do outside of professional real estate. I want to open up a donut shop. I want to open up a bagel shop. Like dreaming of these things that I want to do has given me a lot of hope, knowing that okay, I'm on the right path. It feels like I'm on the right path.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm headed towards something. And like we said earlier, I know that if I do something, I know if I do something, something's gonna happen. And
True.
so I think a lot of that has been great. And then really just my internal self-talk about just myself and life and others, spending time just processing and really trying to turn that into such a positive thing in my life. And instead of saying, oh, I'm really afraid of doing this or what these people think. It's this confidence of like, hey, this is who I am, and I'm so grateful this is who I am, and I'm growing, and I'm excited to meet the people who I connect with along the way. And then on the practical side of what I have been getting hope from, and it's just spending so much more time with people. I had
Mhm.
this thought the other day. Whenever I'm like in a group hangout, a couple things always come up, but travel comes up a lot. And whenever I'm talking about memories, there's one specific trip that I took whenever I was 23. We drove from Dallas all the way to San Diego, back to LA, to Vegas, back down through Arizona to Dallas. That story of that trip and the memories come up at least once every single couple of weeks with the friends I hang out with.
Oh,
So I look back at life and I think, okay, what are the things that I remember the most and talk about the most? And it's those times of adventure and just saying yes and just doing the thing. And so I've been wanting to do a lot more of that. I've been wanting to do a lot more of saying yes to the fun adventures, saying yes to spending time with friends, saying no and I'll figure out the work stuff, all of that.
yeah.
I'm gonna say yes to the things that I know whenever I'm 40, whenever I'm 50. I want to still be talking about these stories that I did whenever I was in my 20s.
Dang, Christian, that's so good. Man, what a fun
Thank
conversation.
you.
I feel like we got practical, we got insightful, we had fun. Like, this was great. You rock. I'm so thankful to you for coming on the
I'm
podcast.
thankful for
Um,
you. No, thank you.
where can we find you? You're on Instagram.
My Instagram, which is where I do really everything, is
Yeah.
Christian B as in boy, Christian B Fussell.
Okay,
Or just
amazing.
type in Christian Fussell, Fort Worth Realtor. I'm that guy.
You're that guy. Amazing. Oh, thanks so much, Christian. Okay, guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks so much to Christian for being on this episode. He was so fun, right, guys? Make sure to follow him on Instagram and be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts and send it to a friend if you have someone who you think might enjoy or benefit from this conversation. We'll see you next week.